Good morning, everybody. What's the temperature in the room? Give me a little wiggle with your fingers. Yeah.
It's
Nice.
definitely morning for me. It's 3 minutes after midnight.
We were wondering if there are any people from the West Coast still up. So thank you for being here with us. That's beautiful. I have the great honor to introduce Peter Merry. Peter plays different roles as he looks to live a purposeful life on our planet in transition. From helping to found and lead social enterprises such as Ubiquity University, supporting other leaders and their organizations such as Ministers of Health in a World Bank leadership program, to develop new philosophies and practices and communicating about them, as in his books, Evolutionary Leadership, Why Work, and the latest, Leading from the Field, and attempting to live as balanced a life as possible with his family and friends. It's an unfolding story of being human at this time. In today's session, the pain and the promise. He's going to talk about the core of our current human crisis is a breakdown in our relationship into ourselves, each other, and the earth. We have forgotten who we are. How did this happen? This presentation will use the spiral dynamics model to show where it all went wrong and what the work is to realign our individual and collective development, unlocking the promise of transcognitive co-creation with the subtle realms of reality. Okay, so I will, for the moment, enable that you can speak freely, so everybody is muted, so we don't have any background sound disturbances. You can put any questions into the chat. The chat stays open. Yeah, so I will be messaging with you there, and I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Great. Thank you, BB. And nice to be here. Thank you all for making it early in the morning. If we were in person, this is always the worst session to have because people are generally hungover from the party the night before, but maybe it's better with in online. Yeah, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to tell a story, maybe about 30 minutes or so, maybe a bit longer, depends how many rabbit holes I end up going down. And then we're going to give you a chance to go out into groups of 3 and have a conversation about how you experience the story and what you feel are the implications. And then we'll come back for a collective exchange. And then at the end, I've got a little exercise for us to do to round us off. So let's kick off with a story, a morning story rather than a bedtime story. So I'm just going to reduce your videos here so I can see the whole thing. There we go. Okay. So over the years at IEC, there are different stories I've told from my understanding of spiral dynamics in organizational contexts to the leading from the field principles, to evolution theory as a whole. Last year, the big picture, big philosophical deep dive. And this year, what I wanted to do was focus on one very specific aspect that is part embedded within the evolution theory, but that feels to me like the acupuncture point of our human journey right now. In a way, how well we manage to deal with this issue, I think, determines how gracefully or painfully our journey unfolds over the coming decades. So I call it the pain and the promise, because essentially what I see is that there's a trauma we need to be able to face and engage in order to be able to unlock the promise of what one might call a holistic engagement with all of life. So the big challenge, I think, is that we have got so caught up in our linear perspective on things that we've kind of forgotten the other side of things. So, you know, when I was doing my research into the PhD for evolution and pondering what I was discovering also in the context of spiral dynamics, I realized that linear time as an experience is actually quite a recent phenomena. So in the early days, as it were, when we were kind of hunter-gatherers, we didn't experience time as linear, we experienced it as cyclical. And linear time only emerged in spiral dynamics language with the emergence of red. So with the sense of separate self that emerged then, with agriculture, along with abstract thought, and all of those kind of things. So that's an important thing to realize, as we tend to assume that linear time is a given in the universe, whereas it's not. And as humanity, we've got caught up on this linear trip that's always about progress and getting better and better and further, even in spiritual developmental communities, you know, where it's all about how do we get to the next level, the evolutionaries moving off into this glorious future of higher consciousness, etc. But there is definitely a trap to that, because if that's our focus, we're all kind of moving away into this future and great progress on all fronts. What is it that we're running away from? So why are we running so fast into this future? What are we running away from in the past that if we were to stop, turn around and face it, would cause us so much pain? So that became a big part of my inquiry, this question of linearity. And that's why I ended up calling it evolution theory, because I was dissatisfied with the stories of not only evolution, which is linear, of course, in its story, but also involution, which is also linear in its story. And my sense was that they are actually one process that is not so linear as we think it is. And if you look at what involution and evolution have in common, well, they have volution in common. And what volution means is spin, and it looks much more like a torus than it does like an evolutionary ladder. So this insight around the pain and the promise came in the context of that inquiry. And if you look at this picture, this image of scale, of where humans are in terms of scale in the universe, that doesn't look very linear. It's weird, isn't it? Somehow, for some reason, we seem to be exactly halfway between the biggest thing that we can perceive and the smallest thing that we can perceive. As Irvin Laszlo and Jude Currivan say in one of their books, we human beings literally stand midway on the scale between the nuclear and the galactic realms. I don't believe that's coincidence. I believe that's the nature of our consciousness, is that as we stretch up and see more, bigger pictures, so we reach down and see more detailed granularity, and that they actually go hand in hand, like the branches and the roots of a tree. One of the other inquiries that triggered this thinking process for me was, how come ancient civilizations seem to contain wisdom and technology that we are now only just coming to understand, when in our developmental models, they were meant to be far less complex than we are? So what's that about? How come as we're discovering these various technologies and insights, that it's through the latest science that we have that we're starting to understand that these people were actually pretty advanced. Now, that's not to say that on all developmental lines they were advanced. There were obviously all sorts of areas where in these societies things could have been improved on the moral lines and other things. But it doesn't seem as simple as a linear process from one stage to another of increasing complexity. So how does that all add up? So my sense was that actually things seem to grow out from the center. If you look at a seed, the way it grows doesn't just kind of grow up. It grows out from the center, where it sends the stem up and it sends the roots down at the same time. So what that suggested to me is that in our human journey, we're not just heading off into this glorious or not so glorious future, but parallel to that journey into the future, we're digging deeper into the past. And as you may have discovered in your own journey, the moment that one wants to take a step forward in our development, you are confronted by something often from your past that you have to deal with before you're able to take that step. Some energy that is held from a past trauma that you need to be able to move forward. It's a nice African proverb: when the roots are deep, there is no reason to fear the wind. So as the wind, as we increase our ambition to make a bigger impact in the world, or to be more whole or compassionate human beings, as the wind picks up, we have to dig our roots deeper at the same time, or we get knocked over. This is a picture of time that comes out of some energetic work, but which also ties into more recent scientific thinking. Well, I say recent, I mean, it goes back as far as, early 1900s with Einstein and Niels Bohr and others, who were realizing that somehow the past is connected to the future. It's not as linear as we think, that our actions in the present create an imprint in the information fields that then influence how we think and how we act into the future. So that may be what is meant by karma, that everything that we do and think, in terms of Laszlo's words of Akashic field, or Sheldrake's words about a morphogenetic field, but an information field where all of our thoughts, actions, feelings make an imprint. And those patterns are what we download as we look to take the next steps into the future. Same pattern. So in the evolution theory, what I'm suggesting is that essentially everything is created out of a tension between a present moment full of possibility and a field of potential, what I call a seed and a potential. It's like in an ecology, a niche emerges where something a gap needs to be filled. And that creates a tension between present and possible. And it's in that tension that things start to come into manifestation as they move from the causal into the subtle and then into the gross. And in that context, this journey of attempting to increase our awareness, be more whole, and in that process increase our freedom, goes hand in hand in my thesis with a need for integration. So that would look in the same way like this, that we have an impulse to grow, and that might be from inside of us. That might be because the world around us changes and calls us to a next step on our journey. Either way, there's an impulse to grow. So what we're doing is we're stretching up for more light, in a way for more consciousness to come in. As we do that, the light indeed comes in. We increase our ambition. We increase our vision, our intention for where we want to go. We invite in a higher frequency of consciousness. That light descends, and what does it do? It enlightens the shadow. So the brighter the light, the clearer the shadow. So that's not always a comfortable process, as I'm sure many of us know. What it does is it brings what is in the shadow into the light, for us to be able to integrate consciously. When we do that, that releases the energy that we need to be able to take the next step in our growth. So there's no growth towards freedom without integration of something in the past. So how is that related to our collective journey and where we are now as humanity on the planet? So I need to share with you, as part of that, a little bit of embodied research that I did with a friend, Dylan Newcomb, into spiral dynamics. Here you can see the traditional 8 levels from spiral. What you can see here now are there are a number of circles, 4 circles, and they represent like an I Ching symbol of 4 yin or yangs. And these were energy dynamics that we discovered when working with dancers, hundreds of dancers. So Dylan Newcomb is a wonderful dancer, worked with a Dutch dance company, and composer and choreographer. And we put hundreds of dancers through workshops and asked them what movements they felt called to make around the different value systems. And those movements were reflected in more of a yin or more of a yang dynamic. And what's interesting here is that you can see, if we start from beige and go up through purple, it starts very fundamental, pure yin, pure yang, and it gets increasingly more differentiated and refined as you move towards the center. And they're all different, from beige to purple to red to blue, until you move from blue to orange. And what do you notice there? You notice that there's a mirroring of those energy dynamics at the center. So if you look at the first 2 in orange, they're a mirror of the top 2 in blue. And then if you look at how that expands out, it expands out in the same way as a mirror. And the way the dancers explained this is they said it feels like, let's say they're talking about orange, it feels like it's the same basic energy dynamic, but it's more subtle and refined. So the same with green and red, same with yellow and purple, and the same with turquoise and beige. So this really kind of, for me, gave me some more evidence for this sense of the spiral and our human journey being less linear than I thought it was. One of the other interesting aspects that the dancers discovered was that the chakras seem to play have a transitional function between these 8 levels. And I should say we chose to work with the 8 as an octave. It was a conscious choice to see what would happen. Now, there are, of course, other concepts of the spiral. Graves talked about 3 levels of 6, for example. But here we're working with the octave. So that looks different, or tells us something more about what's going on than a simple linear model. So you can see here the circles represent the relationships in this way between the different value systems. And at the top, for example, if you take, and I haven't mentioned beige and turquoise there, but essentially beige and turquoise are both unity systems, right? But beige is a precognitive experience of unity, and turquoise is a transcognitive experience of unity. But they are both grounded in a unity experience. The relationship between purple and yellow, what they share is that they're all about relationship and connecting things up. So purple, it's about the relationship in your tribe, as it were, your in-group, whereas yellow's mission is to connect everything up in order to help humanity to deal with the challenges it's facing. Red and green is all about identity. In red, it's all about me, my identity and expression of that identity. In green, it's about we, the collective. In blue and orange, the focus is on manifestation. And this is when you saw the I Ching symbols earlier, that refinement, you're going from kind of archetypal out at beige and turquoise into differentiated matter at the center in blue and orange. That's where stuff gets structured in blue and activated in orange, where blue provides the order and orange provides the growth. So there's a pattern there, which is interesting. Another key pattern, you'll notice these words, internal, external, put over the value systems. So beige to purple have their foundation in yin. That's to say their foundation in a sense of interconnectedness. And it's not a cognitive thing. They didn't sit around talking about how interconnected they all were. They just experienced life that way. That's the foundation tone of those value systems. With the emergence of the sense of separate self in red, our attention moved to outside of ourselves. So whereas beige and purple were much more about sensing from the inside, once we got into red, we individuated, then our focus went to the outside. And that remains the same for the next 4 systems. And if you think about it, that's most of what we understand as civilization. It's focus on the exterior. It includes the emergence of linearity, the emergence of abstract thought and abstract language. So yang is the base tone for those 4 systems. But then when we get to yellow and turquoise, the focus shifts again back to a yin tone as the foundation. The foundation of the perspective is one of interconnectedness, which is why when Graves did his original research into spiral dynamics, he found a quantum leap in the ability of yellow to be able to solve complex problems compared to any of the other first-tier systems. The reason being that they were starting to see patterns more quickly. They weren't lost in the details of the externalities. They were able to step back and sense the patterns of the whole, which is why they were able to solve complex problems more effectively. So essentially, we have this journey where we've moved from an inner experience of things being connected up, the emergence of the cognitive rational self, and then the need to reintegrate, to bring back in this sense of interconnectedness, but in a transcognitive context. So what we've got going on here in the system as a whole is what's called tensional integrity, where the tension, when this system started off, was between beige as the seed and the potential at turquoise. And that tension leads to a kind of breathing process where the information and energy flows in and out of that system, connecting it all up. So and this goes into the evolution theory that I'm not going to go into detail here. But when you activate a system through a tension, you are all eight of the stages, let's say, are available in potentiality when you shift state. So from beige and purple, if you shift state, you're able to resonate with yellow and turquoise, for example, but it's not yet an embodied stage in the process. Well, we're not going to go into that too much now. The key is to notice this relationship between beige, purple, and yellow, turquoise. Have you ever wondered why, when you go to like real in-person integral conferences, on the stage and everything, everyone's talking about integral theory, but when you go to have a drink in the evening, what's everyone talking about? Their latest shamanic experience. And everyone's a little bit kind of shy about talking about it because, oh, are you being romantic and regressing? You know, it's all about purple and, you know. But there's a reason for that, because for yellow to be able to manifest, it needs to be able to integrate purple. So this is the way it works, right? The first 4 stages are in a way unconscious. They just develop in us. We follow the patterns that have been laid down before. The shift at the center, and by the way, that's where the heart chakra is. The shift at the center is where we become self-aware and are able to look back. And so what orange needs to do to manifest fully is to be able to reintegrate blue. What green needs to be able to do is to reintegrate red. So that's why we get the whole mean green mean thing. What is green's issue with red? Well, it needs to be able to integrate it for it to be able to be fully whole. Yellow has to integrate purple, and turquoise has to integrate beige. Because at turquoise, we experience everything as a big web of interconnected energy and information, essentially. And anybody who works with energy will know that working with energy comes through the body. So information that you pick up from information and energy fields, you pick up in the body. That means that for you to be able to do that work effectively, you have to reintegrate your relationship to your body, essentially heal any issues you have at the bodily level. Also, because as we start working in the subtle realms, if you're not really grounded and embodied, you just get knocked off your feet and completely stressed, because the frequency is too high for you to be able to hold. So you see how the relationships play out between the different value systems here. So hold in mind this relationship between beige purple and yellow turquoise. So my senses, this is the pain and the promise thesis in a way, is that collectively as humanity, starting in the Western world, rather than having a healthy development where we would transcend and include the previous levels, when we moved from our hunter-gatherer tribal state into our feudal empires and our agricultural state, we weren't able, for some reason, to be able to transcend and include beige and purple. What we did is that we transcended and we repressed it. When you transcend and repress, you create trauma. So Ken talks about the difference between differentiation, which you need to do when you're moving from one stage to another, because you need to create space for yourself for it to move on. but then you need to wrap in the previous stages for healthy development. Differentiation. But if you dissociate, so you disidentify with the past, you split off a part of yourself and it goes into your shadow. That is what we did collectively in our human development. And what's the evidence for that? Well, the witch burnings for one. How come we were so fearful of the wild, essentially, of the feminine? Anything to do with the earth and the body was demonized. And anybody who professed the ability to be able to connect directly to the natural forces was burned at the stake or tortured or killed in some other way. Why would you do that? It can only be if there's a massive fear behind it. And then we see the religions emerge who take a god and put a god outside even of this material world, outside of the earth, in a vertical position that is completely disembodied and disconnected from the environment that we live in, from the earth that we are, and goes ahead and persecutes anyone who believes that you are able to influence the world around you directly in interaction with the earth. So anyone who would kind of suggest that there was a direct line in a way between themselves and a embodied divine, not an exterior divine force. So when you get this kind of thing going on, this kind of trauma, this kind of split, then the rest of the development becomes skewed. And what we did, so if you think about it, when the sense of separate self emerges, and you'll notice this if you have kids, like up until 1 and 2 ages, they actually are experiencing themselves as connected with the world around. They believe they're one with the mother. And then at some point, they start saying me, me, me. And it's at that moment their consciousness is developing this sense of separate self. And suddenly there's me and there's the other. Now, when you do that, what you're doing is you're creating an object of the other, right? A third person perspective on the other. Now, in itself, that's not a bad thing. But when you do that and you forget that you are also in relationship to that other, that we are also all interconnected, all these others, all these objects are interconnected. When you forget that, then it becomes an object that you can manipulate and exploit without feeling any pain about what you do to it, right? So it becomes an object, and that journey of differentiation, of seeing the diversity and all these objects and things around us is great, because we honor the diversity and the difference in everything. But when you forget the interconnectedness between everything, then you run into difficult territory, because you start to believe you're separate from those things around you, and therefore you can just use them for your own ends without any consequences. So that, in my thesis, is why this split, the fact that we weren't able to reintegrate beige and purple and our internal experience of interconnectedness, is why we created a disembodied culture, cut off at the neck, focused on abstract thought, and why we've been able to cause so much pain to each other, and why we've been able to do what we've done to the earth, because we've forgotten that we are the earth. If you think about it, it's crazy. Any alien looking down would see human beings as an expression of the earth, and we've somehow forgotten that we are the earth, which has meant we've been able to do what we've done to it because we haven't consciously felt any pain about what we're doing to the other. That's what happens when you have a trauma. You get numb to it. You shut it away in the shadow, and although somewhere in your being you are feeling that pain, it's not allowed into your conscious mind. You've blocked it off. You've cut it off. So, so here we are, and this is in a way what the challenge that we're being confronted with now by life is. The earth has experimented through humanity with becoming self-aware. You know, life has attempted to become aware of itself through the human experience. The question now is whether that experiment will be able to continue, because life is going to protect the rest of life if this experiment continues going the way it is at the moment, which is essentially destroying the foundations from which this experiment initially emerged. So that's the edge we're on right now. Life exploring, are we able to hold this capacity for self-awareness without thinking that we're separate from the rest? Because that's where we got to. And if we managed to do that, if we managed to heal this split and reintegrate our deep knowing of who we are, then the experiment has a chance. If we don't, it will just fail and life will try again in other forms. What that means in our little map here is that as we move into the top two value systems, what's called second tier in spiral, our challenge is to be able to reintegrate that split, deal with the pain we feel when we really allow ourselves to remember what we've done to each other and the earth, and the pain it must cause to the earth to know that we have completely forgotten that she is our mother and that we actually came from the earth. All of this energy, information, evolution that's kind of created us, and like a kind of ungrateful teenager, we've walked off, pulled all the money out of her a mother's bank account, burned her house, and thought we could get away with it. We have to face that, because that is what will enable us to release the energy that will give us the possibility to really move in an embodied way into the integral world, and will give us access to the subtle energies and the information fields that we really need if we're going to be able to navigate through this phase successfully. So Ken had some beautiful things to say about this in Up From Eden. I'm going to read you a few quotes now to let it sink in what we're talking about here. He says, "The ego, in the necessary course of its emergence, red, had to break free of the great mother, beige purple, a feat represented in the hero myths. But in its zeal to assert its independence, it not only transcended the great mother, which was desirable, it repressed the great mother, which was disastrous. It is one thing to gain freedom from nature, emotions, instincts, and the environment. It's quite another to alienate them. The Western ego did not just gain its freedom from the great mother, it severed its deep interconnectedness with her." And here, again in Up From Eden, he links this to the emergence of the mind, rational thought, and to the concept of historical linear time that, as I say, emerged in parallel with the ego. Since nature stroke body, notice he's using those as the same thing, the earth body, nature body, is the referent of seasonal time. Seasonal time is cyclical, right? And since mind is the referent of historical time, linear, the severance of the mind from the body, the split severance of the mind from the body, meant a corresponding severance and split of history from nature, of our sense of progress, right, from the cyclical reality of nature. Once the ego was cut loose from seasonal nature and from the body, the split, it has no felt roots in which to ground its otherwise higher order awareness. Purple, beige, split off, and the future development unrooted. Unrooted, if there's a word to describe our civilization at the moment, unrooted would be a very good one. It then seemed perfectly acceptable to the ego to begin a premeditated assault upon nature, regardless of the historical consequences of such activity, because history and nature were no longer integrated, right? The linear and the cyclical were split. We unleashed the linear and the ego and the abstract out of the context of the cyclical nature and sense of belonging to the whole. Likewise, the ego failed to comprehend that an attack upon nature was already an attack upon its own body. How stupid can you be? So that the whole project was, in the deepest and truest sense, finally suicidal. And that's what we're facing today. That's what our challenge is right now. Basically, are we going to evolve or are we going to die? It's as simple as that. We're no different to any other life form in that context. Are we going to learn and adapt or not? And that's a choice we have. And he summarizes it beautifully here. When the great mother, beige purple, is repressed, the great goddess, yellow turquoise, is concealed. When the great mother is repressed, the great goddess is concealed. If we don't reintegrate beige purple, we don't get access to the power that exists in an embodied turquoise. And one may, it is a terrible realization, look in vain through Judeo-Christian Islamic religion, the foundations of Western civilization, look in vain for any authentic trace of the higher touch of the subtle goddess herself. And that would become a perfect and terrifying comment on an entire civilization. Now, David Abraham writes really beautifully about this as well. This kind of how we've separated ourselves in this sense of linearity. He says the conceptual separation of time and space, right? The literate distinction between linear, progressive time and homogeneous, featureless space. So we see time as linear and then stuff around us, it's just matter that we're not connected to, right? Homogeneous and featureless, it's stuff. It functions to eclipse the enveloping earth from human awareness, right? Turn that into spiral code, like our red, blue, and onwards development. It's hidden the beige and purple. As long as we structure our lives according to assumed parameters of a static space and a rectilinear time, right, we'll be able to ignore or overlook our thorough dependence upon the earth around us. Only when space and time are reconciled into a single unified field of phenomena. So we're back into kind of yellow turquoise and with the integration of beige purple. Only then does the encompassing earth become evident, visible once again in all its power and its depth, as the very ground and horizon of all our knowing. So what does that look like? What are we talking about here in terms of worldviews? So I attempted to describe core aspects of our worldview from these different perspectives. So at the moment, in this kind of mid-range, we see time as linear. We talk about past, present, future. We spend a lot of our mental time in the past and in the future rather than in the present. As I'm sure we all know, a lot of our practices are about bringing us more to the present. Our thought is abstract. We can talk about things that aren't even around us, abstract concepts, disconnected often from the actual things we're describing. Our language is abstract. It's about labeling, and it creates separation. So when you look outside and you know a child asks you, "What's that?" You say, "Oh, that's a tree." Check the box. Tree. It's a tree. Okay. End of relationship. No relationship. Right? It's been labeled. You know it. It's a tree. That's it. Right? No sense of that language or that experience connecting you in relationship to that tree. You've labeled it as a third person object. That's just there. It's a tree. And the space, in terms of how we relate to space, we see everything as separated and basically dead matter. So what did that look like in our pre-rational experience in purple beige? At that point, we were experiencing time as cyclical, as non-linear, and we were very present to the reality around us. We had to be paying attention. We didn't get our ass kicked by a tiger or something. Our thought was direct and instinctual. So we were just in the moment, aware. Our language was very concrete about the things we could see around us. It connected us to those things. If you look at some of the old languages, I was studying the old Celtic languages recently, they describe in the language, like the place names is a description of the place. So it has a relationship. It builds, the language builds relationship to the thing that you're talking about. In, I think it was the Hopi language, there is no structure in the language for future and past. It's all ing words in the present. It just doesn't exist, that concept. And the space we experienced as interconnected and alive, you know, hence the talk of the spirits and everything else that you get in purple, animistic. Everything has life force in it, not in an abstract way, in a direct experiential way. So what happens? What would this look like if we were to integrate, reintegrate, let's say, the purple beige, not in a regressive way, but in a way that transcends and includes? This is my sense of it, and it's hard often to find language for it, because language by its nature, our abstract language, defines and separates things, and we're trying to describe something here that's more about interconnectedness, which our language is not very good at until we move into poetry. So our experience of time, when I sense into it, is essentially that we spend our time really present. Our experience is in the present, but we are aware of the influence of the past, and we are aware of the incoming future. We are aware of the probability fields. in the future, but that we don't lose ourselves in them. So our ground of being is the present. And we are aware of these past influences, and we're aware of the future influences and of the relationship between them, like that graphic I showed at the beginning of the two kind of funnels and how those times are connected. Thought, rational thought, still exists, of course, and is still very useful, but it follows intuition. So in this space, our knowing, we know, because we're plugged in and connected to everything, we know the impulse for what we need to do next, and then we activate the rational thought to help us turn it into manifestation. But rational thought doesn't lead. Intuition leads, right brain, heart leads, and then we integrate rational thought. So it's a service to the intuitive impulse that we get in them from moment to moment. The language becomes more connecting and resonant. So we fill our words with meaning. When I was training in the theater in Paris, I had a wonderful Iranian director, and we used to practice saying things in many different ways. And it was all based on improvisation, because every performance had to be alive every evening. Whereas if you just learn text by heart and you repeat it, it's empty of any feeling, of any meaning, and the audience falls asleep. So it has to be alive, and that aliveness means it's full of meaning. So our language needs to stop becoming kind of third-person labeling that doesn't have anything in it apart from a cognitive abstract concept, so that it resonates as sound resonates. This is how magic works. You know, when you actually cast a spell, or you use different sounds, you build a relationship with the material thing that you are, or the other person that you're engaging with, through that resonance. And that allows you to co-create something together that results in a change in the material world. But it's through resonance and frequency. Our experience of space is one of everything being interconnected and differentiated. So the general directionality, I'd suggest, of life is increasing interconnectedness and increasing differentiation. And that's not contradictory, because as things are differentiated and we honor the diversity and the uniqueness of each thing, you create more relationship, right? If you have two things, you have one relationship. If you have four things, you have a lot more relationships. You have 8 things, you have a lot more relationships. So the more differentiated you become, the more the field of relationship builds as well. And we see space as alive. So that's my sense of what it might look like. And the work we have to do around that is this integration of the split that Ken so powerfully describes in Up from Eden. So that is what, my sense of what Volution, the story, can tell, that way of looking at the world that is much less linear. That mindset, as well as practices that enable us to release anything that's held in the past, is, I think, what will help us to heal that pain and heal that split, release the promise into the future, and ultimately enable Earth to keep going with this experiment of self-awareness through humanity, into hopefully a positive future. So if you'd like any more information on things, the whole Volution theory is online, volutiontheory.net, broken down into different elements. On my own website, I blog a lot and communicate more how this evolves over time. You can sign up for a newsletter there if you want, monthly, petermerry.org. And then the new book, Leading from the Field, really describes how we can work consciously from this turquoise perspective with the information fields, but the the deal is that to be able to do that, we have to be able to integrate beige and purple as well. But as we do that, we can actually learn to co-create in the information and energetic fields. And at Ubiquity, there's kind of a lot more learning content around this, these kind of topics as well. So thanks for your attention. I suggest what we do is what we're going to do is split into groups of 3, reflect on how the story, Peter's story, resonates with you, and what the implications are. And as you go into your groups, I will also review the chat questions and comments so that we can come back to those afterwards. So Bibi, do you want to activate the groups?
Yes, activate it now.
I think we got everybody now.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, look at all your faces. That's great. Great. Welcome back. Sorry we didn't have longer. I ended up going on longer than I thought I was. I thought I'll just do this little piece today. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things in the chat, and then we'll open it up for a few minutes to see if there are any things that you have to ask or to comment on. And the best way to do that is to put your hand up, and Bibi digital hand, and Bibi will keep a track. So there were a couple of questions about my take on the spiral dynamics model. I think what I need to say about that is, so when I first did the 3 spiral dynamics trainings with Don Beck, and I was listening to him as, being a kind of cheeky whatever I was, 27, 8-year-old or something. I said, Dr. Beck, it sounds to me like spiral dynamics is a model that's come out of yellow thinking. Is that correct? And he kind of paused for a minute and kind of said, yeah, it could be correct. And I said, okay. So does that mean, therefore, that when we get beyond yellow into turquoise and beyond, spiral dynamics model is no longer an adequate way of describing our reality? And there was a pause. And he said in his broad Texan accent, Mary, I like the way you think. So spiral dynamics has come out of the yellow integral mindset. As we move beyond that, it becomes a stepping stone, but it then is no longer a useful map for describing reality, which is why I went into evolution theory, which takes spiral, but then adds something to it. So when if you look in more detail at evolution theory, you'll see, and by the way, Don has read it and is very appreciative of it as a next step as well, because I haven't thrown it out, spiral. I've said, okay, if it's good to a yellow, then what happens when we move beyond that? What does it then start to look like? So that's a bit of a response to Roman's question in the chat. And then he says, do you assume that you've reached the final stage? Well, I think this is the thing that in a way, I've just been talking about the limits of linearity, and we come back to talking about stages. So our understanding of who we are and how we grow, I think, will change as we get beyond, let's say, yellow into turquoise. And so how we then describe, what things look like, I have no idea, because it hasn't emerged yet. And so people who are like, oh, well, I'm definitely coral, I've done turquoise, and I'm into whatever, I'm kind of, dude, you don't get it, do you? Because linear in that way stops, I believe, at yellow. So that's my answer. And Clark asked, how do 3rd tier stages fit into the mirror pattern? Well, I think the furthest we can go people generally in an embodied way now is turquoise. And then that wraps, like an octave. When you play an octave on the piano, bing, it closes the octave. Something happens then, and then something changes. And the very way we describe ourselves, who we are, and all of that will shift. And I don't think we've got the language for it yet, to be honest. So I think a little bit of humility is also good, and kind of, okay, turquoise is good for now. Let's deal with that first. And then let's see what happens. Okay, and then, oh yeah, and somebody asked Thomas, yeah, I think Thomas Hübel's work, somebody asked, and of course what Bensei does, anything, I think when we're dealing with trauma, often, any level, we're fundamentally dealing with that beige-purple split in many different forms and many different expressions. But I think often that's what it comes down to and what you can tie it back to. So yeah, Thomas's work is really great in that area. Okay, has anyone got their hand up? Take a few minutes, and I want to make sure we've got time for this little exercise. Can you put your hands up here or not? Digitally?
Yes, should be possible.
You should be able to. Okay.
Yeah.
So you press the reactions button, right?
Yes, that's right. Nishad has his hand up.
Sure. Nishad, hey, good to see
Hi,
you.
Lisa. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, I have two very quick questions. The repression that we talk about taking place at red, where in order for the very strong ego to emerge, beige and purple were repressed. Do you think this has happened more in Western cultures than in non-Western cultures?
Yeah.
And one of the ways in which we might see this is that the goddess has remained more prominent in some of the non-Western traditions. And my second quick question is, as we move into the transrational levels, and if we go back and reintegrate purple, do we re-embrace magic again? And does it take a different form than it did in pre-rational times? So is there a difference between a transrational and a pre-rational magic?
Well, yeah, last question first. Yes, absolutely, Nishad. In fact, a good example of that is Dean Radin's book, Real Magic, where he looks at the new science, the kind of noetic sciences and things, and says, look, this is really the same as magic, but now trans-scientific rational, as it were. So it definitely does look different. And I would, agree, and I think you have an opinion on this as well, that yes, it emerged in the West, and that you've seen in other places where this split didn't happen, that indeed there have been more signs of the goddess has emerged, has stayed with us more. In fact, a really good example of this is I'm currently running a leadership program for the World Bank's global financing facility with health ministers of African countries and their top civil servants and stuff. And I was talking to the former minister of health for Ethiopia yesterday. And he was saying 87% of people in Ethiopia still trust most in the traditional healers. And yet from the West, we're getting this whole, Western medicine thing. And our kind of practitioners are stuck in between. And so we've now made a commitment to do something really cool, which is to embark on a project which would look at what can the traditional healing sector learn from Western medicine, and what can Western medicine learn from the traditional healing sector? So what are we doing? We're connecting up again purple, and orange in a way so that it has its place. But yeah, in a lot of countries, it's still alive. And then the leaders are struggling with it because, they're trying to work out, but this Western thing is meant to be progress and this is meant to be old, and yet, so yeah. By the way, Nishad's written a brilliant book, everybody, while he's here, called The Unity of Everything, that describes his conversation with David Bohm. Highly recommended. And it has that for a plug.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, a couple of others then. Daniel? Yeah, I didn't see who was.
Yeah. Hi, thank you very much, Peter, for very, very inspiring talk as always. And I wanted to ask you about this connecting to the pain. How moving forward. I'm involved in Thomas Hübel's work, and he clearly states that the symptom is also wanting to be somewhere else than where I am now. That's part of the symptom of trauma, right? And so the work is very slow work that looks a bit more like somatic experiencing. It's just like, okay, what do I sense that I do not sense, and can I stay with that? And eventually something unfolds and unfolds, unfolds, and energy and the light can come in some more and re-inform me. simultaneously healing the future and the past.
Mm.
So that's where he's coming from. And yesterday I was in a workshop with Bibi. We're looking at virtual reality.
Mm. Mm.
And I know that you like toys. I remember a few years ago, you wowed us with having the field experience itself with your computer and random number generators and whatnot. Is there, do we have another way? Could you imagine now with virtual reality and other emerging technologies that there might be some really interesting other things that could help us connect and know participatively and in a way that heals us faster than this method I just described?
That heals us faster. Now, I don't know about that because it is an embodied process, this healing. So I did an experiment with VR and some deep ecology exercises. And which for me, in person, the deep ecology practices, the work that reconnects Joanna Macy, John Seed, has been the most powerful practices that I've come across for healing the split, as it were. And it didn't really work. Somehow, because you're looking at avatars rather than looking at a real person. And I wanted to experiment with it. But for one person, it worked. For the others, it didn't work. I think it's worth experimenting with, because when you are in VR, you do get a much more embodied experience than when you're actually just on a kind of 2D screen. So yeah, definitely worth experimenting. Guys, we've only got 5 minutes and I really want to do this exercise. Mark, is it a quick one or is it a very deep, long philosophical one? I think you're muted. There we go. Oh. You're still muted. There we go.
Sorry, it's a quick one. Thank you for everything. I just wanted to know, how do you integrate, what kind of embodiment practices do you use?
Well, I mean, just find one that works for you. The deep ecology is a kind of intervention practice, and we're going to do one exercise related to that in the end here. I found really good, but then whatever it is, and sorry, I can't remember his name, Daniel was just talking about now Thomas's work, being able to sense the body and feel things in the body and learn to be with them, sensations in the body, and notice what they do, anything like that, but go to the gym, do Tai Chi, go for walks in the forest, whatever, anything that grounds you and connects you to the body, anything like that is going to be good. But embodiment practices, I think are absolutely really, really critical. But I don't have like a recipe for one. I just suggest you find that, upload the intention that you want to find an embodiment practice and then pay attention to what shows up for you on your path. That's a bit of a cop out, isn't it? But there you go. Okay, cool. Oh, Bibi, what happens if we hit 10:30? Do we like immediately close or something, or do
We can go over. I would like to put a poll in there before participants start to leave the room.
Okay.
But we can go over
we
for
do
10
this
minutes.
exercise first then? All right, if you can stick with it, people, it's really cool. So, so what we're going to do is I want you to identify, pick one other person who is here today, okay, who has their video on. Please all turn your videos on, if you can. And when you roll over their video, in the top right corner, you'll see 3 dots. I want you to click on that and I want you to pin their video, right, which for me is the 4th menu item down, pin their video. And that means that they should be full screen for you, right? They don't need to know, just pin their video. And don't do it with me because I'm going to be reading something. So do it with somebody else. Okay. I'm going to take you through a little guided kind of meditation practice. Okay. So take a moment to ground yourself. Settle into your interior, take a couple of breaths or whatever. And this is just to have a little experience of what it can mean to feel that connection, feel the split, and then feel the power of releasing it. Take a couple of breaths into your heart. and open your heart chakra as far as feels comfortable for you. Okay, look at the person who you've chosen and look deeply into their eyes. Soften your eyes and look into their eyes. So just listen to me for now and welcome any feelings that might arise in you as we go through this. So here in front of you is a human being who loves this earth. That's why they're here today. There are billions of people in the world today doing many different things, but this person has chosen to come here to do this work. Invite any feelings which may arise in you at this thought. Now close your eyes and let the feelings that you had drop away into the earth. Now open your eyes again and take a new look at your partner. Now consider the deep knowing that this person holds about what is happening to the earth. This person knows about the poisoning of the air, the water, and the soil. This person cares about the species of animals and plants becoming extinct today. This person knows about the weapons all over the world, about the 1,000 hectares of forest being clear-cut. This person knows about the great trauma of separation that humanity and the earth have experienced. And somehow, this person has to find a way to live in this world, knowing all of these things. Once again, welcome any feelings that arise. Feel them in your heart and in your body. Now close your eyes for a moment, maybe shake your body a little bit and let go of the feelings. Then open your eyes again, take a breath and look at your partner afresh. Consider how dangerous a world this person lives in. A world full of weapons and dangers of every kind. This person might die of a cancer caused by the poisoning of the air they breathe or the food they eat. This person might die in some senseless war or act of violence. In fact, looking deep into the eyes of this person in front of you, you could be the last person they ever see. And again, don't fight any emotions which are arising in you at the thought. Just let the emotions flow through your body and let yourself express them any way your body wants to. Now close your eyes. Let go of the emotions. Shake your body off. Allow the feelings to drop down into the earth. Open your eyes again. Take a breath and look afresh at your partner. Now, consider what it would feel like to work alongside this person for the healing of our pain, for the healing of our earth, to work alongside them to prevent ecological and human destruction, and to co-create a world that reflects our highest potential and greatest promise. What would that feel like? That's the pain and the promise. So in your heart, say goodbye to your partner. And take a breath. If you want to share anything in the chat, feel free. And then I think Bibi is going to put up a poll. Thank you for joining me today, and do follow up if you have any questions or connections on any of the sites and things that Bibi has shared.
I would like to thank Peter also for coming and giving his talk. It's been such a joy to be with you, and I will unmute everybody now. So you can share some last thoughts and thank yous to Peter. Can we give a wave? Bye.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Peter. Dankeschön.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.
That was
Gracias.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.